used to think that winter in Maine was the coldest thing a person could face. The kind of cold that settles into the bones, slow and sure, the kind you feel even through wool and memory. But I learned, not too long ago, that there are chills deeper than weather. Some freezes come from places you never expected, from voices you once trusted, from hands you once held, from family. My name is Dorothy McKinley, but most people around here call me Dot. I'm 67, widowed, and living in a small coastal town in Maine where the gulls cry before sunrise and the ocean breathes through the fog like a living thing. I spent 35 years as a librarian in Bar Harbor, cataloging books and placing quiet worlds into people's hands. These days, my life is simple. Chamomile tea at 3, crochet when the wind rattles the windows, fresh biscuits for my neighbor Gladys when storms roll in from the Atlantic. I lived modestly, carefully, the way people of my generation were taught. A little savings here, a little sacrifice there, a retirement fund built slowly like a stone wall. Nothing extravagant, just enough to grow old with dignity, with heat in the winter and comfort in the spring. I never imagined anyone would see that savings as an opportunity for themselves, least of all my own son. David was born in a snowstorm. Maybe that's why he always grew restless during winter. As a boy, he was bright, good with words, the kind who could charm a stern teacher and talk his way out of trouble. As a man, well, charm doesn't always age well. He married Mandy 10 years ago, a woman with sharp clothes and sharper opinions, always chasing the next trip, the next experience, the next moment worth posting on whatever sites people use nowadays. They lived 2 towns over, close enough to visit, far enough for me to not know the full truth. Still, I loved them. Love doesn't retire. One Tuesday afternoon, just as I was setting the kettle on the stove, David called. His voice was quick, too quick. "Mom, listen, we have a small issue with our vacation booking. The airline won't accept our card because of some temporary hold. They just need a card to push the reservation through. We'll pay you back immediately, promise." I hesitated. Maybe it was the slight tremble in his voice, or maybe the memory of all the times he'd come home scraped and muddy and I'd patched him up. Maybe it was loneliness. Or maybe it was simply that mothers don't stop wanting to help their children, even when they're grown and should know better. "Just until they clear it," David added, in that soothing way he inherited from his father. "We're right here. We'll stop by." They arrived with hurried smiles and the faint scent of expensive perfume on Mandy's coat. She spoke with bright, breathless urgency, the kind people use when they want your compliance quickly, before you have time to think. They placed the phone on speaker, pretended to talk to an airline agent, let me hear just enough muffled jargon to feel involved, to feel necessary, and I gave him my card. Not because I was foolish, not because I didn't know better, but because I believed, genuinely believed, that love between a mother and son meant trust, that he needed me, and that helping him was right. I did not know I had just opened a door they had already been waiting to walk through. At first, nothing seemed off. The kettle whistled, the days rolled by, steady as tides. I crocheted a scarf for Gladys's granddaughter. The fog thickened along the harbor. Life hummed the way life hums in quiet towns. A week passed, then 2. And then one morning, as I sat at the old pine table paying my electric bill online, numbers caught my eye. A cluster of charges I didn't recognize. A hotel in Portland. A restaurant in some city I'd never visited. A boutique I'd only seen in glossy magazines. A scenic tour priced like a small fortune. $2,150, $1,300, $720, $430. There were others, small ones, big ones, all grouped together like footprints leading away from me. My heart thudded once, heavy and slow. I blinked, refreshed the page, and the charges were still there, indifferent to my disbelief. I whispered to the empty kitchen, "No, no, this must be wrong." I called the bank. I listened to hold music that sounded cheerful and cruel. The representative was kind, but kindness in these moments feels like a thin quilt in January, appreciated but insufficient. "Ma'am, these charges were approved with your card number. I'll note them as suspicious, but there is a process." A process, a protocol, a sequence of steps spoken in monotone. But none of it addressed the hollow place blooming under my ribs, because I already knew, whose hands had used my retirement savings to travel. Still, hope makes fools of us all. I called David. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice too bright, too airy. Behind him, I could hear airport chatter, rolling suitcases, the faint ding of a loudspeaker. "Mom, hey, yeah, the bank messed up, but don't worry, we'll straighten it out." Mandy's voice chimed in, sharp and sugar-coated. "Oh, Dot, these things happen all the time. It's just a misunderstanding." But misunderstandings don't sound like zipper bags closing. They don't sound like vacation laughter echoing behind excuses. They don't come with $2,150 charges labeled Oceanfront Suite. And when they suddenly stopped answering my calls, when "we'll call you right back" turned into silence, something inside me, something small but strong, cracked. The next morning, more charges appeared, and more, and more. It was as if every swipe was a shovel digging out the foundation of my trust. That was the moment a voice I hadn't heard in years whispered from memory, my late husband's voice, steady and warm. "Dot, ownership isn't just having something, it's being able to protect it." My fingers hovered over the phone. My breath trembled once, like a candle flickering before it steadies. And I called the bank again. When the representative asked what I wanted to do, I said it plainly. I'd like to freeze the card. I thought my voice would shake. It didn't. I thought the world would feel smaller. It didn't. I thought I'd burst into tears. I didn't. Instead, a strange clarity settled over me, cold and clean as the February air rolling in from the Maine coast. That single action, that single choice changed everything. Because freezing the card didn't just stop the money from leaving. It stopped me from disappearing. And it set in motion a chain of consequences no one, not even David and Mandy, expected. When the card froze, I thought the storm was happening only inside my house, in the silence between unanswered calls, in the ache of realizing my retirement had become someone else's vacation fund. I didn't know that a much larger wave was already rising far beyond my quiet kitchen in Maine. It happened 4 days after I froze the card. It was late morning, and the gulls outside were raising such a racket that I opened the window just to shoo them away. The cold air rushed in, sharp and briny, reminding me to breathe. I had just sat down with a warm biscuit when the phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize, Washington County Customs and Border Protection. For a moment, I thought it was a scam, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Mrs. McKinley?" a firm, calm voice asked. "This is Officer Ramirez. I'm calling to verify a travel irregularity connected to your debit card." The room seemed to shift. My breath caught. "I froze the card," I said quietly. "There were charges I didn't authorize." "Yes, ma'am, that's precisely why I'm calling." He explained slowly, thoroughly, in the steady tone of a man used to delivering uncomfortable truths. A flight bound for Cancun had been flagged at the gate. A family attempting to board had a reservation tied to my payment method. The system was asking for financial reconfirmation. They were unable to proceed. My son, my daughter-in-law, Their vacation? The one they bought with the money I saved for winter heat, medical bills, and a life lived modestly and honestly. Are you saying they're at the airport right now? I asked. Yes, ma'am, he replied, and they cannot board until the discrepancy is resolved. I closed my eyes, felt the weight of the biscuit cooling untouched beside me. There was no satisfaction in hearing it, not yet, only a deep, trembling sadness, the kind that sits low in the chest, like fog refusing to lift off the ocean. The officer continued, "We needed to confirm with the cardholder before making any clearance decisions." My voice returned slowly. "I did not authorize the charges." "Understood, ma'am. And I will not unfreeze the card." There was a brief silence on his end. Not judgment, just acknowledgement. "Then they will be unable to travel today." The call ended. The house grew impossibly quiet. A few minutes later came the first text from David. "Mom, call me now." Then another. "This is serious, Mom. Please pick up." Then one from Mandy. Sharp, furious. "Dot, they're saying the payment bounced. Fix this." Fix this. As if I were a faulty appliance. As if my entire purpose in their lives was to smooth over their choices. The phone rang again. I let it ring until it fell silent. Moments later, another text arrived. A photo. A picture of the airport departure board with their names listed beneath a delayed flight number, as if showing me the evidence of their inconvenience would sway me. But something inside me shifted that moment, clean, decisive, like a piece of ice cracking under pressure. They were not stranded because of me. They were stranded because they had taken from me. When I finally answered David's call, his voice came through fast and shaky. "Mom, this is humiliating. Just tell the bank it's fine. Please, we're stuck here." "I froze the card," I said softly. "I told you that." "You have to unfreeze it," he snapped, panic under his words. "We need to get home." "I can't," I replied, "and I won't." The silence on the line was the kind that rewrites relationships. A deep, stunned, offended quiet. Finally, he breathed, harsh and disbelieving. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" And I answered with the truth that had been forming like winter frost across my ribs. "How could you do this to me?" He had no words, only anger, only noise. Mandy grabbed the phone from him then, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "You're acting crazy, Dot. Families help each other. You're ruining everything." I didn't let her finish. "Using my retirement money is not helping," I said. "It's taking." Her breath hitched in indignation. "You're overreacting. It was just—" "A vacation," I said. "A vacation I paid for without knowing. A vacation you planned while calling me Mom." Another silence, a heavy one. "I will not unfreeze the card," I continued. "You will need to resolve this yourselves." And I hung up. My hand shook a little when I set the phone down, not from guilt, but from the weight of finally choosing myself after years of choosing everyone else. 2 hours later, they showed up at my door, luggage in tow, faces flushed with embarrassment and anger. They stood in my doorway like travelers returning from a war they had started themselves. "Mom," David said, "we need to talk." But for the first time in my life, I didn't invite them in. They stood on my porch like the wind had blown them there. Red cheeks from the cold, irritated from the long drive back from the airport, and carrying the kind of indignation only people who feel entitled can fully embody. I opened the door, but only halfway. Not enough for warmth to escape. Not enough for them to step inside. Mom, David said, shifting his weight like the boy who once couldn't look me in the eyes after breaking a window. We need to sort this out. Mandy crossed her arms, her suitcase still at her side. She wasn't ashamed. She was inconvenienced. Dot, this is ridiculous, she said sharply. You embarrassed us at the airport. We missed our flight, and now we… My voice came out calm, level, almost too steady for the moment. You used my retirement savings to travel. That's what embarrassed me. David blinked, as if hearing the words out loud rearranged the geography of his understanding. Mom, it wasn't like that, he said quickly. We were going to pay you back. You didn't have to. I didn't have to freeze the card, I finished softly. He looked away. There was a time when his silence would have torn me apart. Now, it simply revealed the truth he didn't want to say. I made an envelope for you, I said. I stepped aside just enough to reach the small table near the entryway, but not enough to invite them into the home they had treated like an open bank vault. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and unadorned, except for the date I had written neatly at the top. Inside were the printed statements, each charge circled in red ink, the hotels, the restaurants, the boutique purchases, the excursions, all the little luxuries threaded with my name. I had underlined one phrase on the summary page, unauthorized transactions. When I handed the envelope to David, he hesitated, as if touching it might confirm something he didn't want to believe. Inside, I said, are the charges you made in my name. There is also a deadline, 2 weeks. Mandy scoffed, an incredulous sound. A deadline? Dot, what is this? Some kind of punishment? No, I said. It's clarity. Mom, you didn't have to take it this far, David muttered, his voice trembling between frustration and something that almost sounded like shame. I didn't take it this far, I replied. You did. He looked down at the envelope, swallowing hard. His wedding band glinted in the weak afternoon light, and for a moment I saw a flicker, a memory. The young man who once brought me sunflowers from the farmer's market because he knew I loved the smell of earth on fresh stems. I missed that boy, but I refused to excuse this man. We'll talk inside, he said, stepping forward instinctively. I stepped back, but not an invitation. No, I said softly, firmly, not today. Mandy's face twisted. So you're shutting us out now? I'm setting a boundary, I answered. There's a difference. The cold breeze moved around us, carrying the scent of pine and sea salt. The gulls cried overhead, circling like witnesses to a truth being spoken. You're choosing money over your own family, she spat. I held her gaze, unflinching. No, I said, I'm choosing respect. David rubbed his forehead, a gesture of a man suddenly seeing the steepness of a hill he had thought was flat. Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you. His voice cracked, barely, but I heard it. I know, I said gently, but you did. And sometimes the injury doesn't need to be intentional to be real. We stood there for a long, quiet moment, the three of us on a porch that had once held birthday balloons, Thanksgiving welcomes, and Christmas wreaths. Now it held truth. Slow, cold, necessary truth. Finally, I lifted my hand and touched the edge of the door. You have the envelope, I said. You have the date. That's all for today. And then I did the thing I never thought I could do, the thing that felt like both a fracture and a mending. I closed the door. Not loudly, not aggressively, just closed. The latch clicked into place like the final stitch in a wound finally ready to heal. On the other side of the wood, I heard the muffled sound of footsteps retreating, the jingle of a suitcase handle, the faint murmur of heated whispers between them. Then nothing but the soft hum of my heater and the low sigh I didn't realize I had been holding. I leaned back against the door, one hand over my heart, letting the weight of what I'd done settle into my bones. Not victory, not vengeance, just dignity. And dignity is a warm thing, even on the coldest days in Maine. For the next several days after closing that door, the house felt strangely larger, not emptier, just mine again. Every room seemed to breathe differently, as if relieved that I had finally stopped bending myself into shapes that no longer fit. The kettle hissed, the floorboards creaked, the wind pressed its cold cheek against the windows, ordinary sounds that suddenly felt like companions instead of interruptions. David didn't call the next morning, or the morning after that. The silence stretched, thin and icy, like the first layer of frost over a puddle. I used to fear silence, mistaking it for rejection. Now I let it sit beside me like an old friend who understood the value of space. On the third day, a message appeared, short, restrained, formal. "We got your envelope. We're working on it." No apology, no reflection, just obligation. A few years ago, that would have cut me. Now, it simply confirmed what I already knew. Remorse and responsibility are not the same thing. So I continued living. I baked biscuits for Gladys next door, who pretended not to know anything but had eyes kind enough to see everything without prying. I swept the porch. I folded laundry with the slow rhythm of someone relearning a lost ritual. I drank chamomile tea at 3, sometimes with honey, sometimes without, depending on how sweet I wanted the afternoon to feel. And somewhere in the quiet, a strange realization bloomed. I could breathe again. The kind of breathing that reaches the bottom of your lungs. The kind of breathing that isn't careful. One evening, as I sat by the window with a blanket over my lap, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. Emily, my daughter. The one who had built a life far away, who had visited less often as the years stretched, and who had drifted into the comfortable distance that adult children sometimes unconsciously place between themselves and the people who raise them. I answered on the second ring. "Mom?" Her voice came, soft and unsure. "I heard what happened." "From who?" I asked gently. "From David," she admitted, but his version didn't sound like the full story. I looked out the window. A thin veil of snow was beginning to fall, each flake illuminated by the porch light. "Then I suppose you know enough," I said. There was a long pause. She inhaled deeply. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything you're going through, for what they did, for not being closer these past years." Her apology came like unexpected warmth after a long walk in the cold. Not forceful, not rehearsed, just true. "You're here now," I said softly. And perhaps that was enough. As days passed, life began to mend itself in small, almost invisible ways. Gladys brought over lemon bars by accident, though we both knew she'd made them on purpose. The librarian from town called asking if I might volunteer for the children's reading hour again. I found myself saying yes before my doubts had the chance to rise. The world, it seemed, was offering little invitations to step back into parts of myself I'd forgotten. A week later, my doorbell rang. Not David, not Mandy. A delivery man stood there with a medium-sized box wrapped in paper decorated with blue hydrangeas, Emily's favorite flower as a child. Inside was a cozy knitted throw and a short note. "For your porch, I hope you sit there often. You deserve warm things. Love, M." I pressed the fabric to my cheek, letting its softness thaw something inside me that had been frozen long before any bank card ever was. The investigation with the bank continued, slow and procedural. I submitted paperwork, I clarified transactions, I answered questions about dates and amounts. It wasn't dramatic, just the quiet machinery of accountability, turning one cog at a time. They told me it could take weeks, maybe months, and I nodded because healing has its own timeline too. Sometimes, though, late at night, doubt would creep in like a draft under the door. Was I too harsh? Had I pushed my son too far away? Had I, at my age, made a mistake by choosing firmness over forgiveness? But then I would look again at the circle charges. I would remember the airport call. I would recall the shock, the entitlement, the way Mandy twisted the knife by saying families help each other while helping herself to my life savings. And the doubt would dissolve. One afternoon, I went to the garden behind the house, where the soil had hardened under the creeping winter. I pulled out the dead stems of last season's flowers, the ones I hadn't found the strength to tend after everything started falling apart. As I cleared the beds, a thought settled in my chest. Sometimes things die because they must make room. Sometimes endings are just disguised beginnings. That same evening, the phone rang again. It was the bank investigator. Mrs. McKinley, I wanted to update you. Several of the disputed charges have been officially recognized as unauthorized. I closed my eyes. The relief was subtle, not sweeping, as if the universe had simply straightened one picture frame on a crooked wall. Thank you, I said quietly. And one more thing, he added. Your card freeze prevented additional charges from being processed. It protected the remainder of your funds. Protected. A word I had not felt in a long time. After the call, I walked to the porch with Emily's knitted throw wrapped around my shoulders. The sky over Maine was a long streak of lilac fading into navy. In the distance, the tide washed in and out with the patient rhythm of something ancient and forgiving. I sat. I breathed. I listened. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt steady. Not untouched, not unscarred, but steady in the way old trees are steady, marked by storms, but still standing. The weeks that followed were not loud. They didn't arrive with thunder or collapse. They unfolded slowly, like the long winters of Maine, quiet at first, then reshaping everything without asking permission. David called less. Mandy didn't call at all. And strangely, their absence no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like space. For the first time in years, there was room inside my life for me. I found rhythms returning, gentler ones. I baked when I felt like it. I read mystery novels without interruption. I began organizing old photo albums, touching each memory with the soft acknowledgement that some stories age well and others crumble long before the pages do. One afternoon, while helping Gladys trim her rose bushes, I mentioned, almost timidly, that I'd seen a flyer at the community center for a women's retreat by the coast. Gladys's eyes brightened immediately. "Dot, you should go," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've been living for everyone else your whole life. Time to live a weekend for yourself." I laughed at first, brushing off the idea. What business did a 67-year-old woman have taking a retreat? Those things were for younger women, women searching for themselves in wide-brimmed hats and yoga poses. But the thought lingered like a warm ember. Later that night, sitting in my chair with a blanket around my shoulders and the Maine wind sighing against the window, I realized something. I had spent decades saving money for the version of old age I hoped to have. When that safety had been taken from me, I learned that the true wealth left was something smaller but deeper: choice. For the first time in years, there was room inside my life for me. I found rhythms returning, gentler ones. I baked when I felt like it. I read mystery novels without interruption. I began organizing old photo albums, touching each memory with the soft acknowledgement that some stories age well and others crumble long before the pages do. One afternoon, while helping Gladys trim her rose bushes, I mentioned, almost timidly, that I'd seen a flyer at the community center for a women's retreat by the coast. Gladys's eyes brightened immediately. "Dot, you should go," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've been living for everyone else your whole life. Time to live a weekend for yourself." I laughed at first, brushing off the idea. What business did a 67-year-old woman have taking a retreat? Those things were for younger women, women searching for themselves in wide-brimmed hats and yoga poses. But the thought lingered like a warm ember. Later that night, sitting in my chair with a blanket around my shoulders and the Maine wind sighing against the window, I realized something. I had spent decades saving money for the version of old age I hoped to have. When that safety had been taken from me, I learned that the true wealth left was something smaller but deeper: choice. And so, with trembling fingers, I made a reservation, in my own name, with my own funds, for myself. Just the act of clicking confirm made my heart flutter with a mixture of fear and delight. I wasn't running from anything. I was walking toward something. The retreat was held in a small seaside inn, perched atop a cliff where waves crashed with the persistence of an old truth. When I arrived, the air smelled of pine and salt. The sky was a milky gray, the kind that makes the world look like a watercolor painting not yet finished. A group of women gathered near the entrance, their laughter rising in little bursts like warm lanterns against the cold. Elsie, the retreat organizer, and a woman with silver curls and a laugh like a church bell, greeted me first. "You must be Dot," she said, grasping my hands with a confidence that made me blush. "We saved the room with the best view for you." I almost protested, the way I always had, trying not to take up too much space, but something inside me whispered, "Accept this." So I did. The room was simple: a quilted bedspread, a small desk, a rocking chair by the window, and a balcony overlooking the Atlantic. When I stepped outside, the wind kissed my cheeks, cold but enlivening. The sea spread before me in an endless blue-gray sheet, its rhythm ancient and patient. That first night, we sat in a circle with mugs of tea warming our fingers. The women introduced themselves one by one. A widow rediscovering friendship, a teacher recovering from burnout, a grandmother learning to live alone after 50 years of marriage, a woman healing from her daughter's estrangement. Their stories had different shapes, but they carried familiar shadows. When it was my turn, I spoke quietly. "My family used my retirement savings to take a vacation," I said, and I froze the card. Some eyebrows lifted, a few murmurs of recognition drifted through the circle. "It hurt," I continued, "but stopping it saved more than my money. It saved me." The words landed in the room like a small stone dropped into water, not loud, but rippling outward. Elsie nodded, her eyes warm. "You protected your future," she said. "Not everyone finds the courage to do that." We talked long into the night. We laughed. We cried. We shared cookies someone had snuck from the kitchen. We became, for that weekend, a tapestry of people mending themselves in good company. The next morning, I stood on the beach with my shoes sinking into the cool sand. The waves rushed toward my feet, then withdrew as if bowing out of respect. I closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel taken from. I didn't feel overlooked. I didn't feel used. I felt whole. Later, as I sat on my balcony eating a lemon scone and watching gulls arc across the sky, a thought visited me. Simple, true, and long overdue. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the way I had forgotten that my life was still mine. And now, Quietly, steadily, I was taking it back. When the retreat ended, the women hugged me as if we had known each other for years. Elsie pressed a little shell into my hand. "For courage," she said, "even when you forget you have it." Driving home along the winding coastal roads, the sun dipped low behind the spruce trees, tinting the world gold. My heart felt bigger than my body, not with sorrow, but with clarity. When I returned to my little house in Maine, I unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of chamomile and old wood. The rooms felt warm, welcoming, unburdened. This was my life. Still standing, still good, still mine. And for the first time in years, I realized something deeply liberating. I didn't need anyone to give it back to me. I had already claimed it. The investigation with the bank moved slowly, the way institutions always do. There were calls, forms, signatures, waiting periods. Nothing glamorous, nothing cinematic. But I approached it the same way I had approached my years in the library, patiently, methodically, returning again and again until the story made sense. Some of the charges were reversed, some were under review, some, they told me gently, might be lost forever. And surprisingly, that didn't break me. Money can be re-earned, re-saved, or reimagined. But dignity, once reclaimed, has a way of making even the losses feel small. David called occasionally. His voice had changed, softer in some places, sharper in others. Guilt can make a man shrink or swell. In his case, he shifted between both, unsure how to approach a mother who had dared to defend her own boundaries. "Mom," he would start, then stop. "I'm sorry," he would say, then withdraw into silence. "I didn't think. I shouldn't have. I never meant." I listened, not with anger, but with a stillness he didn't recognize. Once, I would have rushed to soothe him. I would have carried his discomfort, the way mothers often do, absorbing the shame so their children don't have to feel it. But I didn't rescue him this time. I let the silence do the teaching. What he had done wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. And choices carry weight, especially when made in the shadows. Mandy never called again. There are some distances you don't chase. There are some people whose absence is less painful than their presence. But life, as it always does, continued. Gladys came by with warm blueberry muffins on Tuesdays. Emily visited more often, her hugs tighter and more frequent, as if making up for lost time. The reading group at the library welcomed me with open arms. Elsie sent postcards from her own travels, postcards she funded herself, proudly and cheerfully. And the small jar on my kitchen counter, the one labeled Little Luxuries, began to fill slowly again. I didn't feel alone. I felt accompanied by the right people in the right ways. One evening in early summer, I sat on my porch watching the sky blush pink over the pines. A breeze carried the smell of thawed earth and the sound of children playing down the street. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and took a sip of chamomile tea. My house was quiet, but not empty. My life was simple, but not small. My heart was steady, but not hardened. Everything in me felt aligned. I thought of the charges on my bank statement, the vacation photos I never saw, the flight they tried to take with my retirement. The moment my hands didn't shake when I told the bank, "I'd like to freeze it." That was the hinge, the turning point, the moment Dorothy McKinley, quiet, helpful, accommodating, remembered that she belongs to herself. I didn't freeze a card that day. I froze a pattern. I froze a lifetime of saying yes when I should have said no. I froze a version of myself that no longer fit the woman I had become. Now I know. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors you finally learn to lock from the inside. On a breezy afternoon not long ago, I found that little Post-it note again, the one I wrote years ago and kept by the kettle. You are allowed to say no. It used to feel like a reminder. Now it feels like a truth. As the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, I felt a gentle gratitude. Not for what I went through, no woman deserves that, but for what I found on the other side. My name is Dorothy. I am from Maine, and I took back what was mine, not out of anger, but out of love for the woman I still am. And if you're listening to this, if your own story echoes even softly inside mine, if someone has taken advantage of your kindness, your trust, or your silence, hear me clearly. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect what you've earned. You are allowed to take back your life, one quiet, brave decision at a time. And you don't have to do it alone. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone you care about, you are welcome here. Share your thoughts below, and if you'd like to hear more true stories of resilience, justice, and the strength found in ordinary women, consider subscribing to our channel. There are many more stories waiting for you, and one of them might be yours.